Welcome, everyone. I'm Bradford Sims, president of Capital Technology University. The CapTech team and I are pleased to participate in today's Cyber Summit. We extend our warmest welcome and appreciation to you for joining us at today's fourth in the series of cybersecurity summits in collaboration with Electrosoft Services, Inc. Today's 10 a.m. to noon session will address the challenges of ransomware and malware. A recent flurry of cyber attacks has both the government and private sector on edge for good reason. Many of these involve ransomware, and all of this on the heels of the ransomware attack targeting software vendor Kaseya, and in the wake of the SolarWinds breach and back-to-back ransomware attacks that crippled infrastructure companies Colonial Pipeline and JBS Foods. We welcome you to engage with us in today's informative and timely topic and program. And just a few slides in Capital Tech. We were founded in 1927. We're located in Laurel, right between NASA and NSA off the Parkway. We're welcome to come visit us. And we are, next slide, please. We're a private nonprofit, fully accredited university. We offer STEM degrees or management of STEM degrees at the bachelor's, master's, and doctoral levels. Next slide. We have a great return on your investment. This report that came out from Georgetown University of 4,500 colleges and universities, and your ROI ranks us at 120th overall with your lifetime career from your degree from Capital Tech. Next slide. We have a lot of award-winning areas, especially in cybersecurity. Last year, we became the National Center of Academic Excellence, NSA's center for the whole Northeast Regional Hub of all colleges and universities. Last year, we were the 2020 winner of the SC Media Award for Best Cybersecurity Higher Education Program. And your keynote speaker, Dr. William Butler, this year won the 2020 winner of the SC Media Award for Outstanding Educator. Next slide. We offer many cyber degree programs at the undergraduate and master's and doctoral level. We also offer degrees in critical infrastructure at the undergraduate, master's, and doctoral level. So if you have time, check us out. We're happy to talk to you from one of our admissions folks or participate with industry if you want to work with us. We have agreements with many companies, and we can offer the same for yours. Next slide. And now I'm pleased to introduce our colleague and collaborator, Dr. Sabari Gupta, CEO, Electrosoft Services, Inc. She has an impressive background in software development and professional services in both the public and private sectors, with expertise in cybersecurity, risk management, privacy, and cryptographic solutions. A thought leader and a key player in the cyberspace. Please join me in welcoming Electrosoft's Dr. Gupta.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sims. Electrosoft is very pleased to be co-hosting this event with Capital Tech University, so we really appreciate your participation and support. Next slide, please. Likewise, a few words about Electrosoft. We've been serving the federal government sector since 2001 in a broad range of IT professional services, but specifically focused on cybersecurity and identity, credential, and access management. From a socioeconomic perspective, we are in the 8A program, and we are a woman-owned small business. What really sets us apart as a company is really our strong corporate culture of customer service and excellence, which has earned us top ratings on our customer service scores on CPARs and such. We're also very proud to be recognized as a top workplace by the Washington Post 2 years in a row, 2020 and 2021. Next slide, please. So we are fortunate to have a broad range of contract vehicles, both GWACs, government-wide acquisition contracts, as well as agency-specific vehicles. And in terms of our customer base, we are pretty much 50% spread between the defense sector and the civilian sector of federal government, with our top agency customers being Defense Logistics Agency, as well as the Department of Commerce. Next slide, please. Now, this morning, we are looking forward to a very interesting conversation about ransomware and malware. As Dr. Sims mentioned, these are very timely topics within the cyber community for discussion. because of the recent spate of high-profile ransomware attacks on companies such as JBS and Colonial Pipeline, and then Kaseya, I think, this month. So the point is that any organization can really be a target. We've seen city governments being attacked, school systems and such. So we all need to be prepared. I also wanted to mention that there's a role that cyber currencies and cyber insurance, I believe, plays in the rise of recent ransomware attacks. Due to the prevalence of cyber currencies such as bitcoins and stuff, cyber criminals have gotten a lot more bold. They know that they can get away with their tactics and not be traceable through the money chain. And similarly, because of the prevalence of malware and various types of cyber attacks, many companies have chosen to purchase cyber insurance, which is a good thing, but in a sense, it has actually encouraged the cyber criminals because now they know that both the companies as well as their insurance providers have a pot of money, to pay for things like ransomware, and they might be more willing to settle and pay the ransom rather than fight it. Now, in today's discussions, I'm sure we'll be talking a lot about the different types of defense mechanisms that can be used to prevent ransomware and/or deal with it if it happens. But the top few mechanisms that we've seen, of course, include user awareness and training, because we all know that the end user is almost always the weakest chain in the cyber security protection. And so the more we train our users to be aware of things like malware and ransomware, or not to click on the links, etc., the better. And then, of course, ransomware specifically often targets high value documents or data within the organization and encrypts it. And so one way to protect against such tactics is to have good backup and restoration techniques, in place within the organization. Then, of course, a slew of border control techniques, which include things like antivirus products and/or email filtering at the server and such. And then, of course, nothing beats good cyber hygiene. Malware and ransomware, as we'll see through today's discussions, they come in, they enter the organization, then they spread by leveraging vulnerabilities within the organization from a cyber perspective. And so good cyber hygiene really helps to prevent the entry of malware and ransomware, but also prevents the spread of these nasty sort of pieces of software. So with that introduction, I hope you're all excited about the talk of the keynote presentation by Dr. Butler, as well as our panel. So Net Security is our generous event sponsor, so we wanted to recognize and thank them for their support. So now, I guess I'm at the point of introducing Pete Saronis as our moderator. He's the founder and CEO of Dots and Bridges, as I was saying, and he's very well known in the federal government community, and he brings a wealth of knowledge and experience to this particular event today and the topics that we will be covering. So with that, let's extend a warm applause for Pete Saronis. And Pete, you're up.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta and Dr. Sims, and I'm so honored to be introducing Dr. Butler. There's a lot of academia going on early on a Thursday, but it's an honor to be here. I appreciate the opening remarks. I think today's session will be educational, hopeful, informational, and for anyone listening today or at a later time, enlightening. This is obviously a very critical topic that touches our lives, that touches society, that touches humanity, and the role that government, industry, and academia play in trying to mitigate risk. To Dr. Gupta's points, as I look down at some of the notes I've already taken, her 4 defense mechanisms and what Dr. Butler is going to mention, I think you'll come away today with a lot of information that may spur you to want to learn more. I will throughout, mostly on the panel later today, mention some referenceable material that you'll want to read that's coming out of NIST and the government. But more importantly, I'm just very honored to be here. So let me, without further ado, go through a few of these housekeeping items. The press policy, we welcome our friends and colleagues from the media. The session today is on the record. If you have any questions, there's a Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom interface, and we encourage you to use that tool. We will be monitoring throughout, and then when the opportunity presents to present your questions, we will do just that. If you have technical difficulties, please use the chat box in the toolbar as well, excuse me. And then we have a brief survey we hope you can contribute to at the end and capture your feedback on this webinar, and we look forward to you taking advantage of that. Again, on demand, this session will be recorded with a link available, quote, on demand for your viewing pleasure tomorrow on Friday. So without further ado, as we like to transition, I'm honored to introduce Dr. William Butler. Gentleman I have actually crossed paths with in the past, way back in my days at the Department of Education. So it's great to see you again, sir. Dr. Butler, and I can't read the bio, but I'm going to read a little bit of just incredible pedigree. You're the director of the Center for Cybersecurity Research and Analysis at Capital Technology University. Earlier in your career, you worked in the networking and the IT industries. Obviously, I like to call that as rolling up your sleeves and being in the ping power pipe world, both as an engineer and a consultant for 2 decades. That's awfully impressive. Dr. Butler, you were a Joint Qualified Communications Information Systems Officer in the United States Marine Corps and retired as a colonel with 30 years of service. And of course, thank you for that service. You're active in the National Institute of Standard and Technology's Cloud Computing Security Forum, Cloud Security Alliance, and among other private-public partnerships. Your degrees are numerous, so I will spare reading all 5 or 6 or 7, but folks, go check out Dr. Butler's pedigree on LinkedIn and other places. So with that, Dr. Butler, the floor is yours. We're excited to hear your comments.
Okay, thanks, Pete, for that introduction, and I thank everybody for coming out today. Of course, I'm an educator by trade. I was an operator before, and now I'm an educator, so I will not make this like a lecture, and there will not be a quiz after my talk. Next slide, please. We're going to talk about today what is malicious software, otherwise known as malware, and in particular, a type of malware called ransomware, which has grabbed all the headlines today. We're going to look at some of the recent malware attacks, look at some of the mitigation techniques that you can adopt both personally and in your business. Going to look at the threat landscape. What are we up against out here? Who is the adversary, and what do we see ahead in the area of ransomware attacks? Going to look at the federal response. What is our government doing about it? How can we work with the government to craft a more comprehensive response to the threat? Again, these defensive best practices. Then we're going to look at the role of artificial intelligence and machine learning in cybersecurity and how this may be able to help us combat ransomware. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the collaboration. That's the good news, the collaboration that's going on. And in the end, we'll take some questions. Thank you. So we'll transition to the next slide. Okay, malicious software. What is malicious software? Malicious software takes many forms. It is helpful to know that there is not just one malicious software. There are many, many types that are actually active in your computer today. We're looking at adware. Some people think some of this software is actually good. If you're looking for certain things commercially, adware can be very helpful to bring those ads to your, or it can be a nuance depending on if you're looking for something or not. Botnets are a bad thing. Obviously, these are computers that have been hijacked without the owner actually knowing it and actually used to conduct cyber attacks around the world. So if your computer could be compromised and commanded and controlled by a hacker to conduct attacks on computers in another country. Botnets are a problem. Good thing the FBI is all over it. Ransomware, our topic today. Ransomware is a particular type of malicious software that is used to either lock you out of your computer or lock your files so you cannot have access to them. All are bad outcomes. And it takes on the name ransomware because they want money in the form of Bitcoin to return control of your computer or entire network, or to return the data to you. The bad news is just because you paid a ransom, that doesn't mean your ordeal is over. The adversary could have been in your network for quite a time already and exfiltrated data and actually have your data and actually displaying your data on a website specifically designed to demonstrate that they do have your data by exposing some of it. So I just want to make that clear that just because you paid a ransom, that doesn't mean your ordeal is over. It could only be beginning, and they could return as well. The other types are rootkits, are very powerful software kits that can be planted on your system to actually take over your system. The higher level hacker groups or cybercrime groups, they operate with rootkits to take over entire networks without your knowledge as well. And the other types are spyware. It can be placed on your system to surveil either. They can capture keystrokes as well as remotely view what's going on your system, take over your camera or your microphone. So those are the types of malware. Our next slide, of course, is ransomware, and that slide actually depicts how ransomware works. First of all, how do you get ransomware on your system or on your computer in the first place? And one of the ways that happens, if we can go back to the malware ransomware slide. That's a couple of slides back. Yes, this one right here. Okay, so ransomware again prevents you from accessing your system. One day you wake up, you can't log into your system, and hopefully none of you never see this message on your screen saying that I have control of your computer. I've had control for this amount of time. You have this amount of time to pay a ransom to get your files back. If you do not pay within that period of time, I will expose your data on one of those websites that we talked about today. So you could either click on an attachment on an email. We're all taught to be wary of email with attachments. That is still one of the major ways phishing emails to deliver malicious software to a targeted computer or a network. Clicking on an ad is another way. Even if you see this screen, you don't want to click on it because there is executable code behind certain portions of the screen, or just following a link or visiting a website that your browser's already told you is kind of suspect. So pay attention to those warnings depending on the type of browser that you use. Don't visit a website just because you get a link, especially your banking website. I ran a cyber camp, had an 8th grader actually take a little Raspberry Pi and create a Bank of America website on this little Raspberry Pi computer. And just by a simple redirect, and it was basically an example of how hackers work. We didn't teach her how to do it. She just figured it out. And that's one of the ways that hackers get you. They actually change something. Something changes. You know, a 0 and an O are very close. A capital I and a small L are very close. Just that slight change in the URL will fool you. So make sure you're paying attention. REvil, for an example, has asked for $70 million in one of the latest ransomware attacks. That's the highest ransom that we have on record. All the information that I have is public knowledge. I do not have any classified or behind the scenes information. You can go, I provided all the links for you to be able to go back and look at any of the slides that I have today. So we kind of set the stage. Well, ransomware is a very, very nasty piece of malware. And if you get it, what do I do if I get ransomware? Let's go to the next slide. Both from a personal, these are some of the recent attacks. I usually keep a slide deck that talked about the biggest hacks of all time. Well, guess what? I've had to update the biggest hack of all time. The last 6 months, I've had to update it 4 times. Every hack that we're getting lately is the biggest of all time. And that's not a good trend to be on right now. We saw SolarWinds December 2020 just around there, and many experts believe that compromise actually happened way back in February or March of 2020, and the bad guys just started asking for ransom. So SolarWinds is a perfect example of what's called a supply chain attack, which if I can't attack you directly, I'll attack someone that you trust, or the business entity that is connected to you, that you have already decided to trust. Their software or updates that come from them. Hackers really study these ecosystems. That we are a global economy. We manufacture chips all over the globe. We buy software from all over the globe. We enter into managed security contracts with companies everywhere. And you have to make a fundamental decision. Am I going to trust this entity to connect to my network? Am I going to trust those updates? Hopefully they are signed updates and I can trust them. But SolarWinds was that type. SolarWinds affected. I'm not going to go into gory details of how many entities were compromised, but just know that these are very huge hacks that need to be taken very seriously because they have wide-ranging implications for both private sector and government. The Microsoft Outlook hack, March 2021, hundreds of the government and private sector entities that I don't think there's anyone in the room that doesn't use Microsoft Outlook in one way, shape, or form. We're still recovering from that. The Metropolitan Transit Authority in New York, April of 2021. Ransomware attack. Colonial Pipeline, I was kind of joking with the students. We didn't take this seriously until the price of gas in summer and the vacation. We started taking it seriously then when gas prices started going up. Hey, we got to put a stop to this stuff now. Rumored that Colonial Pipeline paid the $4.4 million. And however, the FBI was able to claw back some of the money by getting Colonial Pipeline and then notified the FBI early in the process. They were able to engage, get involved in the payment process. Remember, these cybercrime organizations are corporations. They have CEOs, COOs, chief financial officers. They have very charming customer service that will call you and ask you, how do you want to pay your ransom in Bitcoin? What Bitcoin, what account can you transfer the money into? Very nice people, very good customer service. However, these organizations' product is crime, and their whole purpose in life is to make money off of unsuspecting companies and users with their latest tactic is ransomware software. And we have JBS Foods, May, just this past May, rumored to have paid $11 million to get their data back. So when you're hit with ransomware, there's a fundamental decision that you have to make, a calculation you have to make. Is it cheaper to pay the ransom or go through, it's an arduous process to recover from an attack, handle the incident and recover from the attack. It costs millions. You have to bring in experts. You have to replace hardware. You have to replace software. You have to pay consultants. In some cases, if you serve the public, like with credit cards or things like that, you have to replace the credit cards. You have to give them a year of credit monitoring. So there's a lot of cost involved in there. So again, if you see the steps, the anatomy of the compromise, that's listed there. The gangs are getting more aggressive until there's a price to pay to conduct these types of attacks, which I'm going to get to later. That we have to present. I was going to be careful what I was going to say here. We have to make the price a little higher to pay if they're caught conducting this type of crime. And it's not going to stop anytime soon until we do that. I'm going to talk about that a little later. Some of the measures that are already ongoing and some of the measures that are proposed in legislation that's going to go before Congress. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, mitigation. What can you do to avoid ransomware? We tell you the major cause of compromise in a lot of cases is software that has not been updated. Software that has known vulnerabilities is no excuse. Known vulnerabilities should be patched as soon as those software updates and patches are out. The hackers are looking at these vulnerabilities as much as we are. They track the same databases, the vulnerability databases maintained by the government and by private sector. So just know if you know about it, they're going to know about it. Antivirus and anti-malware software, keep it up to date. It's not a perfect solution, but it is very effective. Back up your data regularly. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. Backing up your data so you can use the data to try to recover from an event. There's some things you have to do to be successful with that. Just because you backed up the data does not mean that a restorer will be successful. Restoring data can take quite a bit of time depending on how you backed it up. Also, your backup data could be impacted by malware attacks, ransomware attacks, if your data is not kept in a separate, stored separately, either off-site or separate network. There are various techniques can be used to segregate your backup data from your operational data, but make sure you don't make that mistake. And one of the things I've been reading lately is you got to test it. No plan, a plan is not a plan, a real plan, until you test it. It's just a piece of paper. So make sure if you're taking it seriously as an enterprise, that you run a full backup and restore continuity of operations test. Very important. Secure your backups. That was the next bullet there. And have a continuity plan. You've got to, if you want to stay in business, and there are lots of examples of companies that went out of business after a ransomware attack. Your intellectual property and your data is the most important asset you have. You must protect it. And you should report as early as possible. Start cooperating with the FBI. FBI has tremendous amounts of resources that can help you respond to a ransomware attack and also recover. There are other agencies that can help you with that. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, the threat landscape. It's ugly. I'm not going to tell you it's pretty out there. There are lots of groups, either individuals or full-blown cybercrime corporations that are sometimes protected by nations or adversaries. We can name those countries are well known. We know about the North Koreas and the Irans and the Chinas and the Russias of the world. And these groups seem to congregate in these countries, or we don't, in some cases, they may be operating with that government, with their intelligence organizations, or with the, just in general with those governments themselves. As long as their goals are consistent, these hacker organizations are being harbored. And that's something that we need to address, and I'll talk about that a little later. But they operate globally. My motto has always been, cybercrime is a global issue requiring a global response. We are not going to solve it until all the nations that are affected by cybercrime come together, and we're already starting to do that. I think we're getting tired of this issue, basically, and there's something's got to be done about it very soon. They've increased over 300%. That's a lot over the past year. These threat actors all work together. Some work together with others. They're very specialized in what they do. Sometimes they see partnerships form. They conduct an attack. The partnership dissolves. They both get what they want, and they move on. But it is an ecosystem in and of itself. So paying ransom does encourage attacks. We look at the Barbary pirates in the Mediterranean. They had a nice business going on. They coerced a young United States and European nations, actually paid the ransom so that they wouldn't pirate their ships. I see this as the equivalent. Until we send our forces in to take care of the pirates, they will continue to operate. And that is the strategy that I'm going to recommend a little later on here. And let's go to the next slide. The federal response. I think that one of the first times U.S. presidents have spoken to countries like Russia about the hacking, but I think to date, this is the strongest statement from a U.S. president to a Russian president, actually laying out what targets were unacceptable. Basically, the 16 sectors of the U.S. critical infrastructure by either Russia's intelligence agencies or cybercrime organizations operating under their protection. We are beginning to fill senior cyber positions in the White House, Department of State, and other agencies for the first time. There's a lot of momentum built. You need cyber strategists at the highest levels to advise the president as to how the executive branch and the legislative branch should address this issue. The private sector, we're asking the private sector to involve the government, has a lot of resources. There was a time when the government may not have had the resources, but I can tell you today with the hiring going on at Homeland Security, FBI, and other agencies, they have the cyber experts they need, and also on the military side to assist in these. CISA has a Reduce the Risk of Ransomware campaign going on right now. And just recently, the White House has formed a ransomware task force. There is a $10 million bounty if you can identify any of these hacker groups that are conducting these attacks. Let's get the next slide. And this is the Stop from Ransomware site. That lots of helpful information here. This site not only has recommendations as to how to prepare your defenses, what kind of countermeasures are effective, where you can go for help. Also talks about what can you do after you attacked. You're in the middle, you've just discovered you're the victim of a ransomware attack. Who do you call? Who do you email? What agencies can you bring in to help you assess where you are? Try to gather the evidence, forensic evidence needed to determine what hacker group has hacked you if they hadn't contacted you yet. They will assist you through contacting the hackers. They will assist you through the whole process. And the hardest part is recovery. You can't trust your infrastructure anymore. It's been compromised. How long were they in your infrastructure? How much data did they exfiltrate? Because you've got to make sure they can't come back. And the hackers have a tendency to leave back doors in systems so they can come back. So you have to make sure that that system has been totally cleaned and you're ready to operate again. So I would suggest, again, whether you're an individual consumer, we all got computers at home that can be hacked, and all of us are involved in some sort of business or agency that has prepared adequate defense against ransomware attacks. Let's go to the next slide. Here's a document that just came out from the NIST, and it is a cybersecurity framework profile for ransomware risk management. This is as all of these documents are that come from NIST, they're totally free. This is something that you don't have to pay for twice. If you're a taxpayer out there, you already paid to have this document produced. And it basically maps security objectives. As we do in our basic classes, we teach students about the NIST risk management framework, about confidentiality, integrity, and availability, the triad, and some of the security objectives that any recommended countermeasures should address. And this document is written in that way. It gives you a guide to managing risk of ransomware events in your organization. It helps you to determine what level of readiness you have to withstand such an attack, to build your resilience against such an attack. And it also teaches you how to not teaches you, but it advises you how to mitigate the ransomware threats that we know about today. So highly recommend that a lot of these documents that I've provided links to, that you go out, have your people. If you're a CISO out there, you're probably already aware of it. If you're a smaller mom and pop or or an LLC, it still pays you to go out and grab these free documents. And look, the document also breaks down within the 5 cybersecurity framework functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. It gives you specific actions you can take within each of those functions to protect your networks from ransomware. Let's go to the next slide. So some of the best defensive practices out there, I would recommend that you look at all of these. Multi-factor authentication is a very hot one right now. Recommend all organizations to take a look at implementing multi-factor authentication, both for your email, your VPNs, and any accounts that access critical systems on your network. Least privilege is one of the oldest principles in cybersecurity. Only grant enough rights to an individual to get the job done. Again, look at applying the least privilege across your organization. Leverage best practices, both on your on-prem networks and also in the cloud environment. We all have some sort of cloud presence. And make sure that your cloud vendor is implementing the same best practices that you would if you were still storing your data on-prem or in your private networks. Make sure you have asset management in place. When I first started doing risk assessments, the first thing we had to do for a company or organization was to create an inventory for them. You can't protect, you can only protect what you know about, right? So make sure you have an accurate inventory and you maintain it, because that is a fundamental first step in protecting your enterprise, knowing what you have. Not knowing what you have can be looked at as a weakness or as a vulnerability that can be exploited by hackers. Restrict the use of PowerShell on your network, only grant it on a case-by-case basis. Secure your domain controllers. There's documented examples of threat actors taking advantage, taking over the domain controllers, which can be a very devastating attack. Retain your security logs. Security logs are a big deal now, and that's one of the roles of machine learning and AI, is that we have so much data coming in from logs. We need to triangulate that data. And no human can do that job alone anymore. It takes the assistance of software packages and SIM systems, and some of the skills that we're teaching in our programs at Capital is log analysis. Very important skill to have. And baselining. When I was in the networking business, baselining networks was important. How do you know something abnormal is going on if you don't have a baseline showing what's normal on your network? We have that same principle needs to be applied in the security arena. Establish what's normal on your network so you'll be able to determine what's abnormal behavior on your network. Move to the next slide, please. So the role of artificial intelligence and machine learning. This is a very exciting development in our field. You can also see academia has responded by creating cybersecurity analytics programs where we're marrying the data analytics with cybersecurity, again, in recognition of the tremendous amounts of data that we have to sift through to determine if there are any indicators of attack or compromise going on our networks. So we use these algorithms to detect anomalies, again, the unusual activity on our networks. We can detect attacks, hopefully attacks before they actually happen. There are techniques out there to determine if there are indicators that an attack is imminent or that you're actually currently under attack. And also, this software is good at monitoring email to determine if you're receiving an abnormal email or email that meets a profile that you'd like to flag and put into that folder for analysis later. It could be that email could be the one email that is the vanguard of a ransomware attack, for an example. Let's go to the next slide, please. Collaboration. This is a big deal. Cybercrime, again, is a global issue requiring a global response. If there is an area where academics from cybersecurity, from the national security arena, we argue about this all the time. What act in cyberspace constitutes an act of war, or what acts in cyberspace against our nation require a response, both cyber or other means. And the American people, I think, in the end, are going to have to determine what that threshold is going to be. But in the meantime, we have to use a whole of government approach: diplomacy, legal, military, economic. As I said, the U.S. president, I think a U.S. president has issued, at least publicly, the strongest warning to another nation about the hacking. That our critical infrastructures don't mess with our water, don't mess with our gas, don't mess with other vital services to the American people. We're not saying that the financial industry is open game, but we're saying that our critical infrastructure is off limits. Again, key cyber positions have been filled at the White House, Homeland Security, Department of State, and other agencies need chief cyber advisors and strategists to help put together a whole of government approach and response. When we do determine that threshold, we need to be prepared to act. Criminals must be identified and sanctioned, and we have identified criminals along with our partners at the European Union. If those individuals actually step off of a plane in the EU or United States or partner nation, they will be arrested because they have been indicted formally in a U.S. court. And I want to single out awesome work and cooperation from the FBI, CISA, NSA, and FinCEN, the Department of Treasury. They are doing an awesome job individually and working together, and they're only going to get stronger as they continue to fill those hard-to-fill cyber positions. Private sectors need to work with government, share information earlier and more often. Let's work together. There are certain things that the government can do by law that private sector can't. That's why we need to work together. And even bigger, the community of nations. We're already cooperating. We need to cooperate a lot more in the identifying the bad guys in their countries, arresting them, extraditing them to stand trial, and hopefully doing time in a jail will be somewhat of a deterrent for some of them. Again, the byline, we need to all work together on an international basis to address an international problem. And next slide. And we are at the Q&A part of it. I'll take any questions that anyone will have at this point. The expert panel will follow me, and they can go a lot deeper into all of these topics that I only had a chance to kind of glance over today. Happy to take any questions anyone has at this point.
Thank you, Dr. Butler. And as some of the questions start to roll in, I want to give a shout out if our panelists caught a couple references you made to some documentation which is spot on, specifically the National Institute of Standard and Technology's internal report 8374, a great document aligned to the cybersecurity framework. And then to a colleague, Harry Pepper, who wrote in by way of the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence and the MITRE Corporation, protecting data from ransomware and data loss events. For those of us in the audience or who are listening, the National Cyber Center of Excellence, where Dr. Butler does a lot of collaborative work, is a great resource for material and information. One of the questions that came in, Dr. Butler, I'll just go ahead and kind of paraphrase, is this constant this need for continuous improvement, and there's always going to be an event, a negative event, a cyber, a physical event. how do you engage, this is sort of the question, if you will, an organization to buy into that everybody's involved? This isn't just a computer security operation type of effort, that everybody has to take ownership in preventing ransomware or malware events.
Yeah, I like to use the analogy of my days in the Corps, where they say every Marine's a rifle, no matter what your job is. Your first job is to be an infantryman, and I kind of equate that to what we need to do. I for one, I'm not sure when we're going to catch up with all of the openings, shortfalls that we have in the labor force for cybersecurity. It's going to take us a while to get caught up. So in the meantime, we need to train everyone in the organization to be a cyber defender. It's all of our jobs. It's everybody's job to watch those emails, to watch your operational security, what information you are giving out about the organization, what you're clicking on. All of that is important, because all it takes is one person. And all the millions of dollars that we spend on all this technology and training, and it comes down to one employee clicking on one email. So with that said, the awareness, the biggest return on investment, I think, out of all of the controls is awareness training, making everybody aware of why it's important for you to be vigilant and not depend on the cybersecurity department that's overworked, and underpaid.
Yeah, well, listen, let me just make a comment, given that, Dr. Sims and Dr. Gupta's comments early on emphasized that this idea of training, maybe back in the day, and I'm an old fart here, I'm 54, but taking the cyber training on that computer screen back in the day was, yes, I'll answer questions. Okay, to be informed today, we all use these devices, from our iPhones to our kids. And you're right, I think vigilance, a great word. And I just want to underscore that we're all involved in this, as consumers, obviously, as well as organizations, that it doesn't all start and stop with the CIO and the CISO. At least that's something I took away from your comments, Dr. Butler. Another question coming in from Manuel Miranda, I hope I said that name properly, is, will the use of artificial intelligence by bad actors increase the threat to our critical infrastructure? And I think it can, and yes, but do you have some comments there, Dr. Butler?
Yeah, I've seen research recently where there is, one of the topics was artificial intelligence enabled malware, which, when you put all that together, it sounds scary, doesn't it? Well, actually, yeah. It is, because this is malicious software that can actually think on its own. It can adjust. It's like a virus. It will evolve. It can encounter whatever it encounters, it learns from. So whatever defenses it encountered yesterday, it will adjust to it today. And that's scary. And fortunately, we are using artificial intelligence also on the defensive side. We just made critical investments in artificial intelligence research. I think there is I think the DoD has Artificial Intelligence Center of Excellence. So we are beginning to address it. But yes, the bad guys are using artificial intelligence, and it is dangerous. It is a threat.
Yeah, here's another question coming in on the training aspect. And again, I think with Dr. Sims mentioning this early on, there's such an advancement in the opportunity for folks to be educated in the classroom as well as on the job. Do you find, or what are your thoughts, if again, I may paraphrase, what's the emphasis? Is it go get a degree, or is it have that in tandem with just being current and having your professional experience, one where you can learn on the job about these types of events that could impact an organization?
Yeah, that's a good question, Pete. I get asked that question a lot. What does it take to create a cyber warrior? I guess is basically what. And there are many routes to getting into this field. I would say there's a balance between education, training, certifications, and experience. You need all four, depending on what. As we talked about earlier, the NIST workforce framework. There are many specialties there, as many specialties as there are people in this room, and each is a different pathway into that. But I would say, I tell youngsters in high school, create your own lab. Creating your own lab will teach you about computers and networking, and that's a fundamental skill you need to have. And then start to play with the tools. Load your Linux operating system, load your Kali, load your Metasploitable, learn how they work, practice with them. That is a lot of kids say, oh, Mr. Saronis wants to hire me, but I need 5 years experience coming out of college. Of course, you can't have 5 years experience coming out of college, but actually, in some ways you can, because it's experience. Volunteer at your church, volunteer to be a system administrator at the school. All of that is experience. Just because you didn't get paid for it, it is experience. So we have to find more creative ways to create these young cyber warriors, and also retool folks from different specialties. I see people all the time coming in from social work, personal trainers, want cybersecurity. They can do it, and I tell them it's going to be the toughest transition you ever did in your life, but you can do it with a lot of hard work and getting the experience, getting the certifications, and the education along the way is going to build you toward the career that you want to have. And we need everybody in cybersecurity, everybody.
Yeah, we have one more question, if we may, before we move to our panel. And again, I want to underscore a couple of things that I took away, Dr. Butler. Your emphasis on mitigation. I like to preach that there is no silver bullet to this, right? A new event is happening every seemingly day of the week and twice on Sunday. Continuous prevention, learning to recover, and having a continuity plan. Those really resonated with me. So thank you for those pearls of wisdom. Question coming at us for you is, how can folks engage with, you mentioned a lot about the NIST documentation. Is there activities, are there places you would encourage folks, whether it's to read or to engage with these information sharing communities? How are you at Capital University engaging in some of those environments, and can others get involved?
Yeah, certainly. Early on in my career, I worked with the NIST Cloud Security Working Group, and I'll tell you, it was the best education, honestly, that I gotten in cloud computing and cloud security. I always recommend my students get involved in these public working groups, because I tell you, we get to listen to people, high dollar people like you, Pete, for free. Yeah. You get to sit in the room and listen to conversations that you won't hear anywhere else about what is actually going on, what the day-to-day issues are, and the solutions are. So I'll tell you, from personal experience, you learn a lot getting involved in public working groups, either with NIST or with the Cloud Security Alliance. And there are others out there who want you to come in, academics, industry, government, and talk about these issues and create these documents. You get your name on these documents, and that's important. That's important to build your own professional development, to build your brand, and to contribute to these efforts that everybody benefits from. These publications, it's great. Go to the reading room at NIST. There's a document for, I don't think there's anything we do in cybersecurity that they don't have a document for.
That's the truth.
A great organization. Yeah, that's the truth. And you know it, yeah. So definitely recommend that.
Yeah, Dr. Butler, listen, thank you. We're gonna present or move towards our next segment of this incredibly powerful discussion. And again, I want to thank you, and we'll thank you probably throughout. And I hope anybody who's watching or has watched took away what an opportunity to learn from you. So thank you. I want to get prepared here for sort of this next segment, which I'm excited about, which is to introduce our panel. This panel is unique, folks, so stick around. There are incredibly talented individuals you're going to hear from. Some you may know, but the panel here is hopefully going to build upon what we've discussed today, hearing from the three doctors, Dr. Gupta, of course, Dr. Sims, and Dr. Butler. So without reading everybody's bios, this panel is one, again, that is meant to be educational. I'm going to introduce the folks' names. I'm going to do my only pizzaronis kind of way of bragging about their excellence, but please read about them in the public domain on LinkedIn and other places where you may be following these folks. So the title of our panel, if I may, is Malware and Ransomware, Why Do They Matter? We will be joined by, again, a select group of resident experts, a colleague of mine who I've known for years, been fortunate to watch him speak, hear him speak, Stephen Hernandez. Stephen's the Chief Information Security Officer and Director of Information Assurance at the United States Department of Education, and 2 decades worth of knowledge and experience. I remember, Stephen, back when you were at the HHS and the OIG, a colleague of mine, Mr. Joe Roach, said to say hello, where you served in a capacity as a chief technologist, a CISO, a CIO at times. But you bring a wealth of interest and information to our community, and we appreciate you. And big fan of Idaho State University, so welcome. We have Miss Yvonne Rivera, who is a CEO of Cyber Might, MYTE. She is a veteran who served our country, joining the Army, if I'm not mistaken, Yvonne, at 17 years of age. Thank you for your service. You've had an interesting journey through government as an employee, as a civilian, and now as an entrepreneur. You're ridiculously pedigreed as well, and your experience that Dr. Butler just mentioned, I would imagine, helped inspire you to start your company. So we're looking forward to hearing a lot about that journey. Michael Brown, I think of Michael as the gentleman on this panel that has rolled up his sleeves, an engineer, a senior security operations center, thought leader. During our prep calls, Michael helped educate me on just sort of those ins and outs, and it harkened me back to my days when I ran inside of a data center, Michael. And I think that your perspective on this panel from being around that ping power pipe and understanding how it all works will be significant. Michael works for the Electrosoft Corporation. And then Ino Iroha, I hope I said that right. I hope I said it right. I have a funky last name myself. So Ino is a founder and chief architect of Net Security Corporation. I was like beyond impressed with the amount of degrees and letters this gentleman had after his name. So Ino, what an honor to have you as well. And without further ado, I'm going to just stop there and kick it over to Yvonne first and foremost, if that's okay. And if you want to fill in any blanks, Yvonne, this panel for our group and for our audience is to share stories, create the conversation, give us your perspective on not so much what is ransomware and malware, but why it matters to organizations and to humanity. So with that, that's the question for everybody with your opening remark on this topic, and feel free to riff on that topic. So Yvonne, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. So ransomware is obviously a very big deal. And as we heard earlier, with the Colonial Pipeline shutting down, that was, I think, the big eye opener for anybody not in the government. I think that was the first time in our current time that, everybody really was affected by a cyber incident. Obviously, I did join the military when I was 17, and honestly, I feel like I've been around cyber incidents for quite a long time, even mostly internal type things. And then, as I've progressed through the years in cybersecurity, we've seen more and more of these outside attacks, and they are absolutely scary. One of my biggest concerns is a lot of our trust in managed service providers. And I feel like now I'm at a point where it's like, it used to be this great idea to use this managed service provider because, you'd outsource that stuff that really wasn't part of your business plan. It was just something, somebody to monitor your network and these things like that. But, after FireEye, they were like this super trusted entity, and SolarWinds and Microsoft. So now I kind of step back and I'm like, should we all be, hosting, our own things and, making sure that our own internal stuff is secured before we go out there and trust all these outsiders. And so to me, cybersecurity has become, it should become such a huge portion of your business requirements when it comes time to figuring out where you are in your cyber posture. So, if you are, I don't know, a business that has to deal with shipping products, cybersecurity is probably never really that high up in your priority list, but I really think today it should be, because you are a target. We talk about making sure that from the moment of shipment to the moment of delivery, there's this security that has to happen in place, because, the person that's getting this product, how do they know, they're getting what they asked for? You have all these points of interception where these bad actors can come in and just, kind of ruin your reputation, take your money, lock down your whole entire environment, and you can never recover from that unless you're somebody like FireEye and you have tons of money and tons of insurance and stuff like that. So, I guess my biggest thing is, it is important for organizations today to really think about cybersecurity. It's not just about, the bottom line all by itself, which is moving a product, sending a product, making a product. It's also about securing that product as well. And I think it's time that organizations put money, put time and resources, whatever that looks like, into making sure that you aren't a threat, or you aren't a victim to a ransomware attack or any sort of bad actor.
No,
Yeah.
no, great.
I can go on forever and ever.
No. Listen, this is the challenge of being a moderator, is like, I could just listen to each of you for an hour. So let's just, please, if I jump in, it's not an intentional hook. I actually wrote 3 things down that we'll pivot over to, here for a second. And by the way, folks, if you tuned in to hear from Mr. Tagai Andrews, he had a personal matter that he had to attend to, so he will not be with us today, but he sends his regrets and regards, and I hope you can cross paths with him. He's an amazing individual. Let's take a few of Yvonne's comments. Trust in managed security providers, outsourcing, supply chain. As an architect, as a founder of a company, can you build off some of that and talk about, in your words, why this topic is so relevant today, not just for government and business, but for these sectors that Dr. Butler and Dr. Gupta and Dr. Sims talked about, critical infrastructure?
Thank you. So back in 1996, 25 years ago, I started my cybersecurity journey, or career, if you will. I was called to the scene to respond to an actual hack investigation. We were interacting with the adversary at that point in time. The adversary wasn't really interested in starting a company or demanding ransom. It was just braggadocious, right? People wanted to impress their friends how many systems they've compromised. But so I'm really surprised that 25 years later, we're still dealing with these issues, right? And the main point is that the main cause of all of these issues is the same thing, the same security primitive, the same thing. We all of the things we had during the keynote, doing necessary security hygiene to make sure that a security posture of an enterprise is relatively sound. Now we've gone from hosting system on-prem to having a managed hosting private cloud to now public cloud, right? And we've made a lot of technological advancement in that area. So the question is, yes, there were intrusions or a ransomware that affected whether Kaseya or SolarWinds. But the question is, do we want to abandon that ship, right? So the solution is really risk management, right? And we've already discussed all of the key things, key ingredients that has to be in place, right? So doing things like closing the gaps, right? Doing patch management or educating your users so they are not susceptible to phishing email and so on and so forth. So we have to also require our vendors or service providers to comply with our security program. When I worked for a major security company more than 10 years ago, one of the things we did then was, if you are hosting data for us, you have to abide by our security program. And we had a checklist that every organization have to go through. So yes, I agree with Yvonne that service providers have to be held to a strict standard, but at the same time, the corporation, to your point, Pete, there has to be, I'm sorry, Dr. Butler, you have to have inventory of all your environments and identify your risks so that, identify the risk so that you can actually apply appropriate mitigations.
Yeah, I like the words, the partnerships. I plug in the word channel, but those outsourced vendors, right? We look at the cloud now and we look at mitigating risk and the dependence on those who help maintain or do maintain our infrastructure, I think is spot on. We're going to come back to that with maybe some tips that you can share, but I also appreciate you sharing a bit of your journey, how you fell into it, and then you have to learn as you go along when these events occur. Stephen, listen, Director of Information Assurance, Chief Information Security Officer. I just want to ask, for those who don't know you, can you differentiate between those roles and apply, what your passion and being on the government, inside the government with those roles and titles, while policy is a component of that and leadership. Can you speak to this topic and bring to bear something that might resonate for those practitioners who deal with ransomware and malware on a daily basis?
Absolutely. So I came into the government through the Scholarship for Service program a long time ago. I was one of the first ones. The government paid for 2 years of schooling. They basically bought my MBA, and then I owed them 2 years of service after that. They've gotten well over a decade, so they've definitely gotten their money's worth on that investment. But it really is about the mission, and the government mission space is unlike any other, because you ask yourselves, how many times can a startup fail? Well, frankly, as many times as your venture capitalists will suffer, right? That's the short answer. How many times can a government agency fail? That's a big round number, 0. We operate in a hyper environment where resilience is absolutely key. And that means we think, we operate, we plan, and in many cases, we manage risk just a little different than other folks in the industry, because if agencies fail to deliver on mission, people don't get nutrition assistance, people don't get their education, people don't get the medical support that they need. It has a direct impact in people's lives. You may get an IRS audit you weren't expecting. That's never fun. And so we have a hypersensitivity to this idea around public trust. Everything we do, everything we deliver, everything we protect and defend is ultimately in the name of the public's trust in the government and making sure that we uphold and advance that trust. So a little bit about the two roles. When you think about the CISO, that's really the leadership hat. And it's saying this is where the buck stops when it comes to any cybersecurity, information assurance, or cyber risk decisions at the department or the agency. And when it comes to engagement with leadership, the secretary, the deputy secretary, the Hill, the Office of Management and Budget, the White House, I'm the primary point of that spear that's going to head that conversation and defend our programs, defend our approaches, and in many cases talk about the great successes we've had. When you look at the other role, the director role, that's really the organizational leadership role, where I have my team of feds, contractors, volunteers, interns, and we are building programs and we are delivering service throughout the organization, both in terms of governance, making sure that we have the right policies, procedures, et cetera, in place, but also making sure that we are building consumable services that the rest of the department can take from a turnkey perspective. And so you put those together and you effectively have the position where externally and from a leadership perspective, we're reporting out, we're talking about what we're doing, we're defending what we're doing, we're promoting it. But then internally, we're constantly building and evolving cybersecurity programs to protect the organization and do that in a cost-efficient and agile way.
Oh, well said. And thank you for emphasizing mission. Having served 25 years in the government, it resonates with me, folks. There's 452 missions in government, at least according to an institution that says the government isn't just a cabinet level agency here and there. There are so many missions. And Stephen, that public trust comment really resonates. So we will come back and talk a little bit about that. Let's move to Michael Brown. Michael, what I love, aside from the fact that you mentioned in your bio, is that you have a Labrador Retriever named Maya. I have an Australian Labradoodle named Phineas Maximus Saronis, and yes, it's a Greek thing. So that really got me, and that you mentioned your children. You're a cool cat, Michael, and you know, you've had this commercial experience working at Electrosoft. You've worked with big banks and folks who deal with ransomware and malware, and then you're hearing from some of our colleagues in government. If you can kind of tell us a little bit about you and your role, of course, and your passion and why you care so much about this, but being really someone who understands the technicalities and the significance of this topic that's every part of our life and in businesses today. Is there, you know, are we learning from commercial industry as well as we look at this from through a government lens?
I think everyone is Dr. And everyone else on the panel has said great points, and to bring it to I guess a stance of public sector and then the government, how I look at them as an organization, since I've had experience in both. But the biggest thing is compliance, security. As soon as you start saying those words, depending on where you are as a company, your maturity, your organization, it's more serious to you than other times. I think now, as we have a landscape when companies are coming on, the startup group, they do put in compliance, security, those certifications, and they see those at a higher level like the government would be. You know, we've said things like, you know, before we can, you know, agree, you have to have a set of protocols or a set of whatever agreements that we can all share from. I think that's important. I think that those compliance type driven directives help us. Where we get them from? We get them from the government. You know, the private sector, in my view, you know, I've worked with them through internships and developing my career. So you get a lot of the fast, big budgets that you can actually deploy things, test things, and do a lot, and maybe have a little bit of that retention of data that you can use in your production life. And that's helpful. And then you can have like the work groups and then the communities that absorb that information, and then the government can actually pawn onto that information. And then that's when we, you know, you have new technologies that way. And then you can have some type of, you know, grip around it like we do in the open source world. But the biggest thing is why we do all of this is, I think the biggest thing always puts us back to compliance and security, doing the right things. I think if we're doing the right things as an organization, you know, like ransomware, I'm not affected how most people's posture is. But do we want that posture to stay like that, or are we doing anything about it? And a lot of the checklists and things that we do as an organization would keep us aware, keep us awareness up. Cybersecurity is a big notch, as we're all saying. So there's a lot of communities, a lot of knowledge base, a lot of different ways. As an old engineer, I love to go out and find new stuff, trending things. Now I'm curious. Now I get to go and say in a conversation, hey, what are we doing about this? And that's the kind of people that you want working for you, and the leaders like you guys all showed that you want to do the right thing.
No, well said. And compliance is a word that I think most of us inside the Beltway think about, right? Meeting the mail. And I like going back to Stephen's comments, there's meeting the mail, and then there's going beyond. And I think as we come back to Yvonne, entrepreneur that you are, served in government, yes, compliance is important. As a contractor, you want to help agencies meet that mail, but also to go beyond. And I think with mitigating risk, I'm going to go back really briefly to Dr. Gupta's comments about her, I think it was the 4 defense mechanisms. Those resonate, and yet they look very similar, and people can look at them and say, yes, I need to do that. So Yvonne, from a cybermite perspective, your walkabout, as we discussed, can you speak to some of those challenges that you feel this information sharing collaborative community that government industry talks a bit about, but really to make it happen? What is something that you feel you and your company and your passion are helping, tip the scale towards not just meeting the mail, but going beyond it? And talk a little bit about what some of your value proposition.
So this is actually a real big passion of mine. So through my life's journey, again, I was a soldier, then I was a civilian, and then I was a contractor, and now I'm a federal contractor on my own business. And the reason I did that was because every time I started a new organization, a new contract, it was always the same thing. Yvonne, you're here just to make sure that we can get an ATO. So which is an authority to operate inside of the Department of the Army or Department of the Navy. Those are the only 2 places I know of. So I'm sure everywhere else it's something else, but it's basically the authority to connect this thing to the network. So every time I went to some new place, it was like, so your job is basically just to get this to this guy that works at this high level position and make sure he's happy with it, and we'll connect back to that 3 years later when we have to do it again. And it's such a frustrating thing because basically it was a checklist. It was minimum. It was basically political. It was a political checklist to get this thing connected to the network. It wasn't really doing any sort of risk management, like Eno mentioned. It was kind of pointless. It was just this document game, and it was very frustrating. I myself am an engineer from birth, and and I just somehow navigated into the security sector, and I was like, there's so much more to this. And if we did the basics, if we incorporated cybersecurity from the very beginning, from the moment we designed, from conception of an idea, then this whole need to spend thousands of dollars on this one person to just get this document routed from point A to point B, and then redo that 3 years later. And then everybody was just, I mean, today when I talk to people, they're just like, oh, we have to do an RMF. This is going to be 2 years. It's going to take us 2 years. And it's like, I've done RMF in many places. I've been able to do RMF in less than a year. And that's only because I get in there from design and I'm like, no, you need to design this thing from a security perspective. We all need to be security engineers from the beginning, security architects. We all need to think from a security perspective. Once you do that, once you can change people's mindset to think about how can somebody take advantage of this product? What are the attack vectors? What is the goodness that people from the outside or even those on the inside are going to want to do with this product? And let's make sure that we take those into consideration as we're building this thing. So that's where Cybermite came from. I was like, you know what, I'm going to start my business and I'm going to get into these contracts, and I'm basically going to take it over, and I'm going to say, this is what we're going to have to do. And I need to be in all the meetings. When you want to bring in this new product, I want to know about it. And I want to know before you even think of installing it or downloading it from this random website and putting it into your environment and saying, yeah, we're good to go. I want to be there from the beginning. And then I want to tell you 8 months later, hey, you have an ATO. And you know how we did that? We know exactly what's going on in the system at all times, and we're continuously monitoring this thing.
So NIST 800-160, baking security into an organization's DNA is resonating with me. It's not just about the ATO. Now, specifically, have you been able to work on, without divulging whatever you don't want, whatever's publicly available, have you had projects where you're addressing ransomware with agencies in terms of your consulting experience?
No.
Not yet?
I hope to be there soon.
Okay, okay. Well,
I'd
that's
like to say that I've only worked for companies, and the reason I haven't been in that situation is because I prevented it from
nice.
embedding security from the start.
Okay, well said. Well said. But I appreciate that. No, just looking for these use cases and stories, any tips. And that's because Dr. Butler brought up NIST 8374, which again is the Cybersecurity Framework Profile for Ransomware Risk Management, June 2021, folks. Eno, I'm gonna jump to you here. What are some of the steps in your mind? Folks can read about, I think there's like 6 or 7 or 8 that NIST mentioned: using antivirus software at all times, keeping your computer fully patched, blocking access to ransomware sites. From a ransomware, what are some of the Eno-isms, if you will, that you find companies should be doing like right now at the most basic level to prevent ransomware attack? Oh, you're on mute, buddy. You are on mute, the dreaded red mute button.
All right. So can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Right. Very good. So I was at a security conference last week, a cybersecurity summit last week in Philadelphia. And it was basically a gathering of security professionals, insurance professionals, and incident responders like myself. I investigate a lot of ransomware I do a lot of forensics relating to malware or breach investigations. And that's one of the reasons why we decided to develop a product. The one thing, insurance companies are tired of paying ransomware. They are tired, right? Because yes, you get a cyber policy, but now they're bitching and whining. It's like, hey, we're paying too much, right? So we expect to see that there is going to be a lot more requirement from the insured, right, before they can actually get insured for cybersecurity claims. The other thing that I've learned is that a lot of companies that pay ransomware, they don't always get all of their data back or data back at all, right? So I was involved in an investigation in McLean, McLean, Virginia, where the bad actor basically demanded a ransom. The ransom was paid, and they said, "Oh no, we want more." Right? So there is what we call the double extortion and even triple extortion. So the fact that you pay the ransom doesn't necessarily guarantee you that the data is going to be, you're going to gain access to your data. And there are statistics, there are studies. Sophos, an AV company, I think they have a statistics that basically show that a lot of companies don't get their data back. So the number one thing, or the few things you have to do right now is back up your data, make sure you can verify that the backup is actually working. And oh, by the way, the storage device that we discussed today, make sure it's somewhere else, maybe offsite. Backup is essential, right? So the other thing is obviously patch management. You have to patch your systems. I was involved in an investigation of a critical healthcare research related organization a few months ago. They were compromised because of a SharePoint vulnerability, right? Mm-hmm. You've got to make sure that your patches are up to date, right? So patching, and then obviously you have to train your users to make sure that they are not susceptible to attacks, and obviously harden your system, right? Use endpoint threat protection platform, use some kind of logging mechanism, use strong authentication. Make sure that your VPN connectivities is using multi-factor authentication, not just username and password. Ensure that remote desktop protocol connection to your network is highly controlled and even minimized. The list go on and on. So, but I think if organization can actually implement those things that I described, they will be in better shape and minimize future ransomware attacks.
No, I love it. And I'm going to come to Stephen and then Michael. And if you haven't figured it out yet, I try to suck a little air in between the transition so you can riff off your colleagues. Whenever you get to start, you always want to have something which is beyond, oh, I agree with everything my colleague just said. So same kind of question coming at you, Stephen, here in a quick second. basic preventative steps and what can organizations do now. And again, from a federal perspective with regard to ransomware, I want to emphasize again, folks, 8374 at NIST not only is a document that talks about ransomware, again, from a risk management lens, but it actually aligns ransomware application to the categories of the cybersecurity framework. So it's a great resource, and I would go look at it, download it, and start applying it today. So Stephen, let's come to you, pal. Wearing that dual hat, but also being an ambassador for what we need to do more and more. What are some of these preventative steps that you encourage government agencies to take?
Yeah, so
ransomware?
Ransomware is kind of a different animal in the federal space. It has not been as pervasive or as impactful, I think, as some of the other sectors out there. And I think that there's some big reasons for that. The first is, when we think about threats and these attackers, we really have to talk about the motive, the means, and the opportunity. The old Dick Tracy triad of, why does somebody do this, perpetuate the crime? And when you look at the motivation, now it's almost all financial related for ransomware. It's, can I get money? The opportunity is typically poor cyber hygiene. And the means are, pick any variant of malware that they're going to leverage as part of their ransomware attack. What's interesting, though, is I read an article the other day, and it talked about the FBI arresting a bunch of folks involved in a ransomware attack, and it described them as mid-level managers of the criminal organization. And let that soak in for a minute. Mid-level managers of a criminal organization. And that's what we're working with now. And so it's, I love the story about, the yesteryear, it was the hackers out there doing it for the deets or the lulz, as they call them, doing it for the recognition and just to show off and show what they can do. These folks are now getting recruited into these criminal organizations and saying, why don't you make the big bucks and get your honor on the hacker side by working for us? And so we're also seeing that they do a lot of the things that we do in terms of when we go out and scale, we go out and we say, what's the market research? These criminals are doing the same thing. They're looking at who has the ability to pay and who is willing to pay. And consequently, I found the conversation around insurance interesting because one, in the government, we don't buy insurance, we're self-insured. So that's really never a starter with us. But two, what we found is there was a recent study that said insurance provided zero disincentive for people to attack. And in fact, in some cases, when the attackers discovered the organization had cyber insurance, they were more emboldened to attack because they knew someone could and would pay. And so there's also this idea of, if you have insurance, it's probably not the best idea to be waving it around and saying, oh, guess what? We'll put it out in our public papers that we have cyber insurance because we're savvy and we're protected. That can actually put a big target on you because now you're saying we can pay. We have the money to pay. And that's really what's driving this. So in the federal space, a couple things work in our advantage. One, we don't pay ransoms. There's no insurance policy. If we were to pay a ransom, it would be taxpayer dollars. And in worst case, we may be paying into a criminal syndicate that's using that money to traffic humans, commit terror, et cetera. So we just do not go down that road. Big disincentive to try to ransomware the government. Going to take a lot of time and effort, probably not going to get anything. The second piece is we've enforced strict least privilege and least functionality for the better part of 2 decades. We haven't always done it perfect. I'll be the first to admit that. But when you look at the standards that we work to, 853, you'll see that it's basically, you got an end user workstation, you do not by default give them local admin. You got an admin on a server, that server should not just have open access to the internet. There are things we always put in place to restrict or limit things to just what folks need to do the job. And yeah, some people don't like that, especially if they're coming in from the outside, they're coming into the government. What do you mean I can't install my own software? You can get it installed, sure, after we've made sure it's clean and someone from the service desk will install it, and then off you go. So it's a change in process and a change in mind. But I think because we've taken this approach in the federal space, we've seen some incidental drive-by ransomware, but even when it hits, it's one workstation, it's one network share, and we already have that backed up. So for us, it's almost inconsequential in many ways.
Stephen, if I'm listening to that and I'm a bad actor saying, wow, they don't pay the ransoms. I mean, number one, I think people would say, yeah, well, we'll just see about that. But I love that you referenced the 853, right? And folks, the controls that the government in collaboration and partnership with critical sectors, right? These aren't just for government, are obviously controls that make sense to help, again, mitigate that risk for these, bad actors and events from occurring. And, I think we can learn a lot from industry. I'm going to come over here to Michael here to talk a little bit about that. I mean, especially Michael, given your time working with these large banks where cybersecurity, physical security is significant. But yes, Steve, and I think any references to, and feel free to reach out to Steve, and he'll probably tell you about 10 other documents or 20 you can read that help secure your infrastructure. So thank you. So Michael, we've been talking about preventative steps. Has anybody not said something that you go, Pete, this is one that has to be in the top 5 or top 10, whether it's, what can you do now as an organization, but must continue doing, throughout at least the time you're there, supporting an organization from a ransomware prevention.
To piggyback off everyone else's thinking, or Mike, I would start, let's think about it as this is your first day and you're a security professional and you don't know. So the first thing I would do is make sure a policy is in place for specifically ransomware. Malware, look around, make sure that's there too. But you definitely want to get on your threat intel defenses, make sure it's being monitored specifically, and with all the other latencies that we have. I think that, making sure that we're looking for this word, it's not just, a conceptual idea. Make sure that the system owners are aware of what we're talking about and can define it. Like you said, the federal government is maybe a bad place to poke at, but what we're forgetting is the biggest actor I find that, the biggest target that I've seen over and over again are school systems. They're vulnerable to most of our state infrastructures. And, they pay, and sometimes they don't. And they're loosely off of our state and things of that nature, somehow attached to the government somehow. But I've seen those targets over and over again. And defending them as a company or as an organization. So, they are targets. And like you said, sometimes you don't pay the ransom, or if you do, it may not be worth it. So you do need to know that, is it worth it? I just wanted to say that as well, because sometimes people can start over. And if you're running an AWS, maybe you can, shut down and start over and just start new today and have to delete all your data, which could be very disruptive.
Yeah, well, Michael, it speaks to some of your comments in our prep calls about being constantly proactive, if I can, paraphrase what I captured, and that's reaction is a lot of what we deal with. We react to an incident, a 0-day event we may hear about later, but being reactive isn't a position we can afford to be in. I think your comments about being proactive and every day taking on this perspective that something could happen, and what am I doing to mitigate that risk? Did I capture a bit of your comment?
Yes.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. And again, we're going to come back in our next segment. And again, folks, I encourage questions to come in. I'm seeing a few roll in here and there. People are referencing documents to be reading. I'll highlight a couple, just if I may, coming back to you here in a minute, Yvonne. Recovering from ransomware and other destructive events, NIST Special Publication 1800-11, NIST's Guide for Cybersecurity Event Recovery, Special Publication 800-184, and let's not forget about the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, and its Multi-State Information Sharing and Analysis Center, which is an ISAC Joint Ransomware Guide. Those are 3. I'm sure we can come back to you with references to those links, but those are great pieces of information, which again, in the spirit of this discussion today, ransomware and malware, bad stuff, but they happen. And then what are we doing to mitigate that risk? I just want to also say that for those who might be wondering, if you haven't already Googled, because I did a few times preparing for this, is the distinction between the two. The one of the definitions I really like is that, what is ransomware? It is malware that employs encryption to hold an organization or a victim's information at ransom. So some people like to think of it as a subset of malware, ransomware that is. But again, if you can picture that as we continue our discussions, I appreciate it. Or hope you appreciate it. So Yvonne, let's come back to you. Let's talk about the executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity that came out in May for a quick minute. It addresses a lot. I know zero trust architecture, cloud, analytics, and while I can't recall for the life of me if it mentions ransomware or malware, but in the spirit of what that executive order is speaking to in light of what's happened with Colonial and what has happened in other places or could happen, what are some of your thoughts on that executive order and its impact, potential impact?
Whew, I got a hard question.
Come on, that's a layup. You read it, you interpret it, you think it's a good thing. What?
Yeah, I do think it's a good thing. I think that for a long time, or maybe, for the past year or so, I've heard, zero trust get thrown around a lot. And I think for a lot of, in the IT industry, we like to use a lot of buzzwords. And what would be nice is if it's not just buzzwords, it's not just an executive order, it actually happens. I know that um, my company, one of the things that that we're trying to do is, or that we have done is we've created a cloud solution, and essentially this cloud solution solves a lot of the issues. I'd like to believe is going to solve a lot of the issues that we have today in trusting MSPs and having that zero trust and using least privilege, basically bringing the government requirements into industry, which at a cost that industry organizations can handle. Like Stephen said, the government, they have a lot of resources, they have all these requirements, so they're able to, have a hardened environment by nature, because it is literally what they have to do to protect the information. Where in industry, organizations typically focus on just what it is that they're trying to do, or sell or produce or whatever. What we're trying to do is bring kind of those government requirements to those industry organizations and say, this is what you need to me in order to meet those requirements of zero trust and supply chain protection. And a lot of the things we're trying to do has to do with encrypting your data, no matter where it is in your environment, backup solutions and redundancy and contingencies and recoveries, things that a lot of industry doesn't even consider. So that's basically the premise of my organization and what we're trying to do. We're not so much reactive in nature. We're more in tune to trying to be preventative, proactive with a bunch of organizations and get them to a point where what we like to do is let them sleep at night while we're out slaying dragons is kind of like our little motto. They can sleep sound knowing that Cybermite's out there, slaying the dragons is our thing. So, that's all.
No. I think I took away from that. Yes, it's a critical importance document. I think it puts out there that there's a lot to consider, and I like to.
It's going to be expensive. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. It's like we put out these orders and they're going to be expensive for the everyday organization to be able to meet that, somebody who's printing paper for the government. We're talking about somebody who's so low on the government supply chain, but they're going to have to meet these requirements. How are they going to do that? They don't have government backing, they don't have government funding, they don't have government support. But if they want to still deal with the government, they're going to have to meet these requirements. So like, how are we doing that? And then Cybermite comes in. I'm just letting you know.
Yeah. No, a lot in there. And again, those who haven't read it, take a gander. There's a lot of requirements being put on federal agencies to respond and to prepare. And I'm seeing some comments coming in. talking about the culture and especially we mentioned somebody, one of our colleagues, I think Michael mentioned that, at the state, local level, school systems, I mean, folks that have the resources and those that don't to mitigate that risk, to prevent a ransomware attack. I mean, that's a real thing. So I think I'm going to pivot here, for a quick minute on culture and not training, but building that culture of cybersecurity awareness, ransom awareness. That's kind of a ism I just made up. What are some suggestions that or recommendations, even if it's off the cuff, that organizations must take today to encourage that horizontal awareness of or inclusivity, that this isn't just a thing we have to spend money on and try to keep the bad folks out? How do you build that culture of community to say that, listen, this is to protect the assets, the information that touch everyone who works in the organization and any of our extended partners if they use us as a service provider?
Very good. Very great question. And this is something that isn't really talked about in the security circle. We were engaged by a very well-known federal agencies. The reason they engaged us was to come in to provide them with a culture-based security awareness training, right? A lot of organizations, they use maybe some of the well-known phishing companies, right, to level phishing attacks against their target users, but they are largely ineffective because a real adversary is going to have a lot of what we call phishing layer within an email, right? They will be very sophisticated, very difficult to detect, and will bypass the traditional users. So I imagine that a lot of the companies that are getting successfully phished and subsequently compromised is that they are actually doing social engineering. I don't have any study, but I would theorize that. Having said that, a lot of organizations can, again, they can do a little bit of what we call the culture-based awareness training. That is really reaching out to the users, right? Having a one-on-one, like the CISO, for example, can engage the users in a brown bag where they basically talk to them about the importance, not just having them do the annual or the orientation security training. That is insufficient. You got to do something exciting, like playing games as part of the security awareness training program. You have to engage the users. You have to make sure they're part of they own the asset of the organization or the agency, right? They have to all get involved, and the training has to be proactive, right? It can't be every quarter or every semi-annual. It has to be all the time, getting the users engaged. And that is how you actually going to change the culture of the workforce.
Yeah, no, great points. And Stephen, coming at it from that government watching industry, you're very outspoken from hey, always encouraging. I mean, again, this is personal. I see you speak, I watch you speak about the partnership. What can industry, if I may, and maybe government be doing, not a better job, but more of, to encourage that, wow, we can learn from you and vice versa, right? The government isn't just about compliance. We may be hard, right, not be the best target if you think you're going to get, ransom out of us, but what can be done to move that needle, to share more information, to protect our nation and our international sectors?
Yeah, I think we're seeing a lot of that right now. So, for example, if we look at what's happening in the zero trust space, we have something that, at least in the federal space, at the CIO Council level, was kind of sparked by Sylvia Burns and Joe Klimovich saying, this is kind of a cool idea. Is it something that we could look at? And in fact, at that point in time, it was really zero trust networks, layer 3. Got that into ACT-IACT. I was one of the folks that was part of that leadership team from the government side. And we went through and basically produced a report saying, yeah, it's possible. That was almost 2 years ago. And now, through several other iterations, when we look at where we're at today, We've got Zero Trust explicitly called out in the executive order as an architecture, not just layer 3, but basically the whole stack. We've got NIST engaged with a special publication and the Cybersecurity Center of Excellence bringing in dozens of vendors from the private sector to come in and work with us on building out real life, here it is, operating in the lab, proof of concept, no BS, zero trust architectures that agencies can then deploy. And then what we're seeing is the rest of the industry around us, they're moving that direction too. They're saying, whoa, this is actually kind of cool. And if the US government is doing this writ large, maybe we ought to be thinking about it as well. So it's been an interesting cycle because the original ideas came from industry nearly 20 years ago, but they really hadn't taken hold and seen the adoption that we see right now until a large group, in this case, the US government, said, hey, we're going to take this and run with it, and it's going to be kind of our next iteration of defense in depth.
Yeah, Stephen, if I can just build off that for a New York minute second, is this, since I brought up the executive order that came out, ironically, around the time Colonial, and look, folks, Colonial Pipeline, that affected a lot of people, right? If the lights don't turn off, if the heat doesn't come on, I mean, people die, bad stuff happens. What do you think about the executive order, aside from, hey, we're taking it seriously? Does it give you that hope and excitement? It talks about ZTA in there. It talks about cloud. What are your feelings in your pulpit as to that executive order and its potential impact?
Yeah, so I will say that I'm very bullish if I were investing with that executive order. So for folks who may not be aware, when federal agencies get an executive order, it carries the equivalent weight of law. So this isn't recommendations or guidance. This is thou shalt, and it's under the same auspice and importance as if it were a law from the Hill. When we look at the executive order, we see it being kind of the North Star, the cardinal point that we're going to align ourselves with into the next 5-10 years potentially. And the big areas I think you see there are, one, continue that push towards cloud, which I know some people say, wait a minute, that's kind of MSP territory. You're putting a lot of trust in them. Right. But then we look at the other parts of the executive order. We're going to put a lot of expectation on those providers to be good, transparent partners, especially with sharing threat information, implement good sound security that we can get near real-time visibility into. And also we're going to update things like the federal acquisition regulation to make sure that it's going to be consistently applied across the board. So I think that you're going to see a lot of action coming out of that. And I think that the biggest part of it is we're going to get more consistency and clarity about what the government writ large expects from its partners.
Wonderful. And in that spirit, I'm going to come to Michael. Michael, I love when I have a chance to have government and industry on a panel, in a discussion, in a conversation. What do you feel, if I may, wearing your industry hat, your experience, as I like to say in your walkabout, what can government be doing more of, not better, not worse, to instill in or share with or learn from industry when it comes to this idea of risk mitigation? What can the government do more of, aside from executive orders and policies?
Right. I guess the big question to me is small business. Yvonne said something to that nature earlier. The bigger businesses, Capital One and, the big Blue Cross Blue Shields, I think they can handle their own, part of what the government requires. Then I'll take it back a little bit to FedRAMP. Before we had cloud, there was just a cloud. And the government said, well, we like this, but in order for us to operate, you need to build us basically a replica of this so we can basically have our own environment, for a better choice of words, that runs just like yours. But the biggest thing is we can have the controls. We know what is going to be the connections. We know the interlacency of it. Now, the problem is it's still a cloud type of thing. But having said all of that, I mean, you still want to focus on maybe the weaker parts of the plan. As we define a plan, there's definitely weak places. So I think that we definitely should give attention to those places, not like the bigger banks and things of that nature. I think we should still hold them to the same rigorous requirements. But I think as we think of security and we think about, like the zero trust model, we definitely want to think of the weak links in that policy just to, tighten those up or make sure we have some hooks and monitoring for them later. So it will come up maybe on the breast. But the reason I said a small business association, they have a better avenue to those types of businesses and organizations that, are looking towards to them for, maybe some security advice from the government and things of that nature.
Yeah, I'm going to move here into our parting shots, which folks who haven't been on a panel with me, you're going to have that. What do you want to leave with the audience here in a minute? Because we're at 11:50 and we have about 10 minutes left. So think about what you want to leave with the audience here. But I'm gonna summarize what you just said, Michael and team, that I feel like is just important to this discussion. That the role that government, industry, and academia, obviously, Dr. Bradford Sims talked about this educational opportunity, the workforce. You talked about collaboration across. Yvonne, here you are, worked in government. Now you're out there as a small business looking to help agencies and organizations think differently about their cyber hygiene and risk posture. And of course, Dr. Gupta mentioned that with Electrosoft and Michael, that expertise is not in one place. And I think it's this fabric that I know Stephen knows, that there's lots of opportunity to work with government, but nobody has the silver bullet. It has become a very non-cost centered discussion. And I think, being an architect, it's not one solution, it's a multitude. And I think this type of, at least for me, education is that you gotta be willing to get up every day and engage with people who may have a perspective that could trigger a thought as you build out your architecture and meet the spirit of the executive order. So that's kind of my summary of what I heard today. And I think it was and is amazing. I'm so again, honored to have this opportunity to meet you all. So Yvonne, let's go to you. Parting shots, whatever you want, could be in a second, could be 5 words, but keep it to a minute or less, just to kind of summarize what you took away from today and what you hope the audience takes away.
Yeah, so what I took out of today was obviously ransomware could be catastrophic. It could be, the end of your company, your business. So in order to not fall victim to a ransomware attack, I think it's time for organizations to become more proactive. This means train your users, try this cultural-based user training, as mentioned, protecting your data, backups, storing your backups off-site and not on the same network that was just hit with that ransomware attack. Making sure that your organization is not just logically protected, but physically protected. And reference, reach out, take a look at all those free guidance out there that's provided by NIST and CISA and things like that, the organizations that are on this call today. And I think my last thing is, build a solid security program, which includes all those things we just mentioned, and make sure that they are enforced from the highest level of that organization. That way they are trickled down all the way to, the lowest person in that company. I think that's, what I took from a lot of this, a lot of the conversations we had today.
Thank you, Yvonne. You're on mute, buddy. The dreaded red mute button.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
I think that since regulation may not work due to the politically charged country that we live in, I think maybe the government needs to do some more public campaign to basically let the users, paid commercial or paid campaign of some sort, to basically let the community or the population and businesses, small businesses and large businesses as well, know that cyber threat is real, and they have to basically do what they can to secure their data. And to organizations, I say this to them: if your data is lost today, would you be able to stay in business, right? So the response should be, make sure the data, you have a breach response plan that basically simulate or describe how you can plan for a breach and recover from a breach. So I thank you for the opportunity and hope the information we've shared today will help you better prepare and repel ransomware.
Well said, Eno. Stephen, floor is yours.
Thank you, and thank you again for having me today. This has been a fantastic discussion. I've learned a lot from my fellow panelists and really enjoyed the engagement with the audience. I'm going to springboard on several of the comments that have been mentioned and kind of stand on the shoulders of the giants here and say that probably the most important thing you can do and understand is how the cybersecurity aspects of your organization impact that mission and be able to translate and speak to that impact in terms of the mission. And I think I unpacked that a little in one of the Q&As about the ability to build a culture and the ability to speak to the level where it resonates. So if someone's building software, speak to them in terms of the software outcomes. If someone's on the board of directors or the executive ranks, you really need to be talking about primary essential functions and the impact there, and really be talking about the trade space. If we don't do X, then Y could happen. And if you want to prevent that, here's what we need to move forward. These are valuable conversations. We have a couple mantras in my organization that I'll leave you with. And the first one is one team, one fight. We're all here for the same reason at the end of the day, and that's to execute the Department of Education's mission. And once we start to frame things in that context, life gets a lot easier. Second one, know the risk, provide a way. Any cybersecurity professional can espouse the first part and tell you how bad something is, but the real true experts and the exemplars are the ones that do that second part and provide a way. I gloriously stole that from the National Geospatial Agency, but I thought it was absolutely beautiful for the work we do as well. Thanks, folks.
Stephen, you're the man. And again, we got to talk Joe Roach. Michael, let us finish this out, brother. Give us your 2 cents and what you want to leave with the crew.
Yeah, I do have two. I think the biggest thing is that, like everyone has said, community. I think the organization needs to establish a community for cybersecurity. Period. I think once that is done, a lot of the like Moon said, that you have to be excited about this stuff. You have to champion the effort and carry it on through the organization. And I think if you have a leader for that, that would do. And the last thing that you must have for an organization or agency, you got to have a security engineer. Without a security engineer, none of this works. So you have a proficient security engineer, and I wanted to go back to Doctor's points on education and experience. Yes, there's a lot of people that want to do this, and you can see the stuff on commercials. But without the education and the job experience that you can say that you're a leader of my organization, you want to make sure you hire good, qualified people that can give you good recommendations and keep you out of things like Ms. Rivera and other places people can do in their pocket. So I think that's the last thing I had, just those two things. Make sure you got a security engineer, and make sure you establish a good community and have a leader for your organization.
Well said. Thank you to each of you. I know we're closing out here. I'm going to pass the baton back to Dr. Gupta. But again, I shared my observations. You're all amazing thought leaders. Thank you for the time and the opportunity to facilitate the discussion. We have our survey. Please fill out the survey. We want to hear from you. The recording will be made available on demand tomorrow, Friday the 23rd. Thank you again and again. And Dr. Gupta, thank you. And the floor is now yours.
Okay, well, a reverse thank you to you, Pete, for conducting such an exciting panel, asking all the incisive and difficult questions at times. And thank you to the panelists. You're all experts in your own space. Thank you for sharing with us your insights based on your own unique perspective. Each of you come at it from a slightly different angle, and that's very helpful, as we learn more about this topic. I also wanted to thank Dr. Butler for his wonderful keynote speech. We all learned a lot more about ransomware and malware, and I think some of the things I liked about his talk that really stood out for me was, this $10 million bounty that the White House Ransomware Task Force has put out. It's almost like crowdsourcing, the catching of cyber criminals, right? So that's a good thing. And also the role of AI and ML, both as an enabler and to catch malware and ransomware. But we're running out of time, so I did want to also recognize our event sponsor, Net Security, and for supporting this event and participating. Thank you very much. Also want to thank our media friends for their participation and support. And finally, I guess passing it back to Dr. Sims and thanking Capital Tech for being our excellent co-host for today's event. Couldn't have done it without your support. So over to you, Dr. Sims.
Thank you, Dr. Gupta. I want to thank the panel, thank Dr. Butler for being the keynote speaker. And of course, we want to thank our organizational sponsor, Net Security Corporation, for sponsoring this event. Capital Tech is pleased to support today's event in collaboration with Electrosoft Services. And I want to again thank Dr. Sabari Gupta and the Electrosoft team. They did such an excellent job doing the presentation today. Let's give them a round of applause. And I just want to also briefly highlight Capital Tech's connection to cybersecurity. Over 20 years ago, Capital Tech added one of the first master's degrees online in what used to be called information assurance. And that program grew quickly back in the day. And in 2018, we added degree programs in critical infrastructure because we knew we had to talk about the 16 sectors of critical infrastructure, how to protect them. We have students understand better about what the facilities are, industrial control systems, operational technology, all attack points which connect directly with our cybersecurity areas as well. So if you want to learn more about Capital Tech or contact Dr. Butler or any of us here at Capital Tech, visit us online at captechu.edu. So once again, thank you for joining us today. And oh, there's another slide. Net Security Corporation, again, we thank you. And I think you have one more slide to go to. Thanks to everybody attending today.